going to start with Sarah Stuteville, sitting to my right. Sarah is the executive editor, is that your title?
Sure.
Founding executive editor
that sounds good.
of the Common Language Project, which, as we'll hear, is a very exciting form of a group of young journalists doing independent media on a local and an international way. And I'm going to just ask her to start her comments by responding to the question, well, it's not hard to come up with a basic definition of what is essential journalism, including coverage of local and state governments, investigative journalism, covering government and business, and contextualizing international media coverage. These may also be the most difficult forms of journalism to sustain financially. What are some creative responses to that challenge?
Well, yeah, that's the big question, is how are we going to get this kind of journalism funded? And it's something that at the Common Language Project, you see our website up there, we've been talking about for at least the past 3 or 4 years, because the kind of journalism that we do, investigative work, international work, enterprise work, multimedia stuff, it's not the typical bread and butter of news institutions. And it's, while newspapers, there was always prestige connected to doing this kind of work, it wasn't what made them money. So as we see newspapers folding, we wonder what happens to this type of work and what kind of economic models can we look towards. And I just wanted to say, when we're talking about saving newspapers, I'd like to broaden that statement a little bit. So I don't think that we're always necessarily talking about saving the existing newspapers in exactly the form that they're in now. We're talking about saving institutions that support good quality journalism. And I just wanted to sort of throw that out there and kind of have that in the back of people's minds. So we have heard a lot of stuff, or at least in the media community, we've heard a lot of stuff about how we can address this in different models. One is the audience-supported and audience-generated model. Spot US is probably one of the most popular, common examples of that right now. It's where audiences actually vote on the stories that they want to have covered and then offer money based on how important it is for them to have those stories covered. It's a really interesting model. I think it has some shortfalls. Namely, they never raise enough money to actually do the kind of investigative work that I think audiences want. And part of that is because audiences are really disconnected from how much money and support investigative journalism takes. So, one example I heard was they wanted an investigation into a water system somewhere, and they raised $900 to do it. And it's kind of like, well, you're going to get a $900 investigative story about water system somewhere. That is what it is. The nonprofit, low-profit models, we have examples of newspapers in the United States that have survived for generations as nonprofits. There's the Poynter Institute-supported paper out of St. Petersburg. So we do have examples of that working. Again, I think it's a model that has its positives and also its limitations, and it's probably something that won't work for every newspaper out there, but it's definitely something people are talking about. Foundational support, that's a big one for the Common Language Project. That's just basically writing grants and getting foundations to support the work that you do. I think that's rising to the top of the list of ways that people are trying to get their media projects supported. It works when you can get the ear of existing foundations, but there aren't a lot of foundations out there that are funding media projects right now. So it's a pretty small pool. Also, as we've seen at the Common Language Project, it can be a very vulnerable source of money. With the recent economic downturn, we've seen a lot of funding cut and people just sort of shutting down certain parts of their projects, including media projects. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And then we've also heard about university consortiums. There are rumors of these new models coming out of Boston, most recently here at the University of Washington too. The idea that an existing institution with credibility, funders, and a name could sort of provide some sort of support for a consortium of journalists or a collection of media projects. And I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to see potentially emerge here in Seattle. But I think, if I had to round all of this up, what I would say is that the key is that there isn't really going to be a magic bullet solution to the problem of funding this kind of media and defining what this kind of media is and figuring out the best way to get it supported. I think we're going to be looking at exploring a lot of different solutions, and different projects will be using sort of hybrids of all of the things that we're talking about here. And that's something that I'm really excited about. And I think in this first sort of burst of both panic and enthusiasm, people are like, what next, what next, what next? This is what we've done so far, and we need to find another model that's going to fill this role. And that's just not the world that we live in anymore. It's not going to work that way. We're going to be doing a lot of different stuff, patching a lot together. But I think whatever we do end up doing, whatever those hybrids look like, we really need to focus on getting the community involved in it and giving the community a sense of ownership over the media in their towns, in their cities. Because I think, to a certain extent, when you look at what's happened with newspapers, it's easy to say, this happened because the web happened, and that's why they closed down. And that's part of it. That's an important part of it. But it's also, frankly, because audiences don't think they're that important anymore. Audiences haven't been, fighting for them. And I think it's important to keep in mind that if we want sustainable journalism, if we want supported journalism, we have to go back to the community, back to the audiences, find out what they want, find ways for them to get involved so that they have a sense of ownership and pride, and they understand what an important role this kind of journalism plays in their society. So.